I have a hot take. I don't think that remembering every single detail from the books that you read makes you a better person, a better student, more intelligent, etc. And I think that the way that books impact you in the present is equally as important, if not more important, than how it affects you in the long term. And just generally, I don't think it's that serious. I think reading can be as fun and whimsical as you want it to be. But anyways, I got ahead of myself. Here we are. We're back in the car. This is still broken. Here we go. Essentially, I made videos a while ago, like 3 years ago. I believe this was the last video that I made about like a book reading update. And so I wanted to do a bit of a reading update since then. Not that many books, not many books for 3 years. But I'm going to be giving you a list of every single book that I've read since then. And I haven't really looked anything up for any of these books. So some of them are like I read 3 years ago and haven't really thought about since. I did look up names and like how to say names. But other than that, that's all. It's just coming from up here. We're just going off vibes right now. Okay, so we're starting from the last book that I looked at in the last sort of video, whatever. You can go watch it if you want. It's fun. I'm starting with Truth and Beauty by Anne Patchett. Anne Patchett wrote this book about her friendship with Lucy Greeley, and Lucy Greeley wrote Autobiography of a Face, which is an amazing book. It's so good. It's about their journeys as friends and writers and general companions. I remember Truth and Beauty being really well done. And I will probably be reading more of her books in the future. The next one I read was The Cancer Journals by Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde did eventually pass away due to breast cancer, but this is what she wrote about having breast cancer as a Black woman. She talks about like her own perspective on her breasts and the need for women to perform. This was written, I think it was published in the 80s, but this was long before the discussion around women's body image was really mainstream, especially for Black women, especially for Black women with cancer. The next book I read was Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. This was crazy. This book is about two main characters, Dodo and Anyanwu. They're both shapeshifters, but in different ways. Anyanwu is a shapeshifter in like the more traditional sense that you would think of. And Dodo is a shapeshifter, but he has to essentially he can like take over other people's bodies, but he has to kill the original host of the body in order to do that. And he has to do that to survive. And they're both I think thousands of years old. They're both very old. They've existed for a very long time through this magic. I think Dodo is a lot older than Anyanwu. And Dodo essentially coerces Anyanwu into being part of his project. I forgot to say, I'm gonna try to not spoil anything through this video. I'm just gonna, gonna be chill about it. The next one I read was a short story collection by Sandra Cisneros called Women Hollering Creek and Other Stories. Short story collections are really difficult for me. I just do not remember them. The lack of like a continuous narrative really impacts my ability to remember any of the stories. And this book is a perfect example of it. I remember really, really enjoying this, but I unfortunately do not remember a single plot point. I know that all of the stories are about being a Tejana, but yeah, I recommend picking it up. I don't remember anything from it. Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler was incredibly difficult to read. Not in the sense of like reading it physically was difficult, but the content of that book is really a lot. And I also think that it should be required reading. It is so important now and has always been, but especially now. I mean, she's a genius. She was a genius. One day I will read Parable of the Talents. It's just it's heavy. It's heavy, but it's so good and so relevant. The next one I read as I was going through my like Goodreads. Sorry, I still have Goodreads. Goodreads, by the way, sucks. It sucks. Not even like even if you don't take into account the whole Jeff Bezos Amazon thing, the interface of the app and the website just sucks so much. When I was looking through my Goodreads, clearly I needed some like lightness to read after Parable of the Sower. And I read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. It centers, I think, like an ex-bounty hunter who is not human. I think nobody in the book is human, and she sets up a coffee shop in a small city because she's like tired of being a bounty hunter, and no one in the city knows what coffee is. And so it's just like a very heartwarming book and very lovely descriptions of like being in a coffee shop and making coffee, and people like discovering how lovely it is. And she meets this other character, and it's kind of queer, and it was just cute. The next one was a reread. I reread A Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is a very short novel, and it's all written in verse, and it takes place over the course of, I think, 1 minute, and over the course of one person's journey down an escalator, and it is so good. Again, something that I think should be required reading in all schools. But of course, I don't know, you could go look at my my banned books video that I made like 3 years ago. I feel like if I say any more, it's gonna spoil it maybe a little bit, but read it, please. The next book I read was Tomorrow. I think there's no and. By Gabrielle Zevin. I enjoyed this. I thought the beginning especially was very good. I thought the characters in the beginning were very well thought out. As it dragged on, I was like not as into it. I did look the author up very briefly, and apparently there is some more recent news that came out about her. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't necessarily attached to the book. I didn't think it was that good. So I think if you do want to read this, maybe get a free version online. The next one I read was My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I really enjoyed this. I remember the feeling that I got reading this book more than anything else. I remember some of the plot points. I remember their friendship feeling so visceral. I haven't told you what the book is about. It's essentially the story of these two young girls. There's a scene in it of them trying to get back home through the rain, and I could feel the inner child me feeling afraid. And it was just really well done. The next book I read was The Miracle of Mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh. I remember liking it, and I'll probably read it someday. That's all I remember. The next book I read was Diary of a Void by Emi Yagi. Couldn't tell you a damn thing. This book had to do with the protagonist being pregnant or not pregnant. Something to do with pregnancy. I don't know. Moving on. The next book I read was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I believe I listened to the audiobook of this, which is, I think, narrated by John Green himself. I love so much when audiobooks are narrated by the author. I think it makes them so worth it to listen to. The essays that really stood out to me were the ones on Kentucky Bluegrass, the one on Old Lang Syne, so good, and the one on Dr. Pepper, a classic John Green take. The next book I read was Pew by Catherine Lacey. This book is the story of an anonymous character showing up in a church one day. No one knows what their gender is. I don't really think they know what their gender is either. And there's just so much mystery surrounding this character, and it sort of permeates through this small town. I think this book explores lots of aspects around transness, and the character becomes sort of a scapegoat for this town's sins. And like more is slowly revealed through the course of the story, but I would say there was never like a real resolution. It gave me this sense of like removedness and confusion that I think the author was going for. The next book I read was Asada. If you don't know Asada Shakur, now you know. If you don't know, now you know. Asada Shakur passed away recently, I think in the fall of last year. Asada Shakur was a Black American activist who escaped from prison after her supposed murder of a New Jersey state trooper, I believe in the 80s, and she escaped to Cuba. One of the main things I took away from this, aside from her being so brutally mistreated, is her perspective on the Black Panther Party. I highly recommend it. The next book I read was another short story collection, so you already know that I don't remember anything from it, but it was We Are Engulfed in Flames by David Sedaris. I do remember one essay about an old house, and I remember laughing out loud a few times while reading this book. The next book I read was Who Will Run the Frog Hospital by Lori Moore. I just really love reading about girl friendships. Girl being kind of a gender neutral term. It's just like a vibe. This book was about two girls living in, I think, a rural town, and I forget what year. It's all about how these girls understand each other and how they don't. I remember some of the quotes, like, it's beautifully written. The author, Lori Moore, is amazing, and I do really want to read some more of her books. I think going back over this list of books, it reminded me of tons of authors that I want to read more of. There was one line in this book that talked about what it's like to walk past people who are in love with other people, and describes it as moving through the part of a pool in which someone has peed. Maybe I'll put the quote here. I thought that was brilliant. And there are tons of other quotes like that kind of stuck with me for a really long time. The next book I read was The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. There are, I think, tons of videos of people doing this sort of whole process. The Artist's Way is essentially a workbook written by Julia Cameron, and it has a bunch of prompts, and it requires this thing called morning pages, which is, for me, I think it's different for other people, but for me it was writing a stream of consciousness every morning for like about 30 minutes for a few months. And the book also requires you to take yourself on artist dates, which is just, I think it was once a week, taking yourself out to go do something creative or to see something creative. I think I'll be reading this again and like doing the whole process again. I think I don't really know if it helped me last time. I think doing the morning pages was a really interesting process. I don't know how much it I don't think I had any revelations or anything. There were some nuggets of wisdom that I took from this. One of them being how important fear and jealousy are in understanding what you want. Like if you're jealous of someone else or something else, understanding that as a signal rather than as like a negative emotion. The next book I read was Psalm for the Wild Built. This was a reread, I think for like the third time. The book is by Becky Chambers. This is one of my favorite books ever, so I do know it inside and out. I will give you a short synopsis, but I will not reveal anything. It's the first book in the duology by Becky Chambers, I think called the Monk and Robot duology. It takes place in this utopia where humans and robots have decided to peacefully live apart from one another. It centers a protagonist. Their name is Sibling Dex. They are non-binary, and their unlikely journey with another character. That's all I'm gonna say. The book is pretty short. It's a really short read, and it talks a lot about like what humans are here for, what we're supposed to do with our lives, and it's just a very comforting read. I know that sounds like a huge topic, but it's approached in such a delicate way, and it's so good. I think this is probably going to be a book that I like come back to like every 5 years to reread, at least, maybe sooner. The next book I read was Record Scratch. I totally forgot a book in the middle here. I forgot The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I don't know how I forgot it because I loved it so much. I'm not even a big fantasy reader, and I absolutely gobbled this up. I remember actually reading the second book in the series as well, and it didn't have as strong of an impact. But this first book, oh my god. Okay, back to the video, I guess. The next book I read was The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, a classic. This book, it was an instrumental introduction on how patriarchy affects men, specifically from a Black woman's perspective. I already had sort of a general understanding of what Hooks talks about in this book, but I still think it's incredibly important for everyone to read, especially men. And I also think it's important to know when reading texts like this, like the reason that I know what I know now, and the reason that I think that some of the things mentioned in this book are like pretty foundational to my knowledge is because she was the foundation. Like Bell Hooks was the first person to really talk about this. So I think some people read it and they're like, yeah, it's kind of basic, but like it's basic because she said it. The next book I read was Everything for Everyone by Emmy O'Brien and Iman Abdelhadi. It's a collection of fictional interviews between the years of 2052 and 2072, which in this timeline is post the anti-capitalist revolution that happened in New York and post the establishment of a new society and economy. So it's fictional, of course, but it reads so historical. I really want to reread this one day and dissect it chapter by chapter. In my last video, I actually referenced an article that I found through this book because one of the authors wrote it, Emmy O'Brien. I've never read anything else like this where it's a fictional set of interviews staged in the future. The next book I read was The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I enjoyed this. It jumps around in timeline a lot. It takes place after the Second World War, or I think maybe during and like slightly after. It centers an unrecognizable burnt patient, a Canadian woman who is a doctor and like a self-proclaimed thief, and a Sikh sapper. It jumps around in perspective a lot and centers different people at different times, which usually is kind of a turnoff for me because I spend too much time thinking about the characters and not enough about like the feeling of the book. But there actually aren't that many characters in this and it's pretty easy to follow. I remember a lot of the plot. I read it kind of recently, but I am really left with the feeling of the old abandoned villa that they are all in. And it's so much about sensuality and presence. And it also asks the question of like, really what's important here. The next 3 books I read, I talked a lot about in my last video, so I won't go super in depth into them here. Anyways, that's all I have for you right now, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.